Lyra was not born to be a pet. She was not born to wear chains. But in this world, her wishes did not matter. She was a young alien girl with silver eyes and soft skin that glowed faintly in the dark. Her people once lived free, but now they were hunted, captured, and sold like animals, and Lyra was one of the unlucky ones. She lived in a cage. It was small, barely enough space to stretch her legs. Cold metal bars surrounded her, and a heavy collar pressed against her neck. Every morning, her master came, a tall alien with gray skin and 4 cruel eyes. He never called her by name. He called her pet. He called her thing. Sometimes he laughed at her. Sometimes he ignored her, but never, not once, did he treat her like a person. Lyra had forgotten how long she had been trapped. Days blended into nights. Nights blended into days. The only light came from glowing crystals on the walls, filling the slave pens with a dim blue shine. Other cages stood beside hers, filled with creatures from across the galaxy. Some were small and trembling. Some were huge and broken. None of them spoke. They had all given up, and sometimes Lyra feared she would give up too. Her life was simple but cruel. Food came once a day, a small bowl of gray paste, thrown inside the cage like she was feeding time for an animal. Water dripped from a rusty pipe, and she had to catch it with her hands. If she failed to obey commands, the collar around her neck burned her skin with electricity. The pain was sharp, enough to make her scream, and the sound of her scream made her master smile. At night, when silence fell, she curled up on the hard floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes staring at the bars. Sometimes she dreamed of freedom, of running through the forests of her home world, feeling the wind against her skin. But when she opened her eyes, the bars were still there, the chains were still there, and hope felt like a cruel joke. Lyra wanted to fight back, but she was weak. She had tried before, once long ago. When she first arrived, she kicked, she bit, she clawed. The punishment was so brutal that her body shook for days. After that, she stopped trying, she stopped hoping. She became silent, she became still, she became what they wanted her to be. A pet in a cage, but deep inside, something small still lived. A spark that refused to die, a voice that whispered, "This is not the end." Every time her master looked away, every time the guards mocked her, she held on to that tiny voice. It was weak, but it was hers. It told her that one day, something would change. She did not know how, she did not know when, but she wanted to believe it one evening. The slave market was louder than usual. Voices echoed in the air, sharp, angry, excited. Lyra sat in her cage, listening. She heard footsteps, heavy and rushed. She heard shouts from the guards, and then whispers from the other slaves. A new prisoner had arrived. Lyra raised her head, curiosity stirring in her tired eyes. A new prisoner, she thought. What kind of creature could it be? Was it another broken slave, another silent victim? Or was it something different? Her master walked past her cage, his 4 eyes gleaming with greed. He was speaking to another alien, their voices low but filled with tension. Lyra caught only fragments of the words. Rare, dangerous, from a far world. Something about those words made her heart beat faster. Rare, dangerous, from a far world. What kind of being could that be? She pressed her face against the bars, trying to see through the shadows of the pens, but she could not. Only noise reached her ears, louder and louder, until it seemed the whole market was alive. The other slaves whispered too, their eyes darting, their voices trembling. Even those who had been silent for years now whispered. Lyra had not seen such reaction before. She did not understand it, but deep inside, that small spark inside her heart flickered brighter. Something was coming, something different. And maybe, just maybe, it was the change she had been waiting for. For the first time in a long time, Lyra did not close her eyes to sleep. She stayed awake, listening, her silver eyes glowing softly in the dark, her heart beating with quiet fear and quiet hope. And in the shadows of the cages she whispered to herself, "Who are you?" The market was louder than ever. Chains rattled, guards shouted, and merchants argued over prices. But in the middle of all this noise, something strange happened. The crowd moved like a wave, everyone turning their heads toward the gate. Even Lyra, tired and hopeless in her cage, felt the pull of curiosity. A prisoner was being dragged inside. Not like the others, not weak and broken. This one walked on 2 legs, tall, shoulders straight. His wrists were tied with heavy chains, his clothes torn, dirt covering his skin. But his eyes burned with fire. They were not the eyes of a slave. They were the eyes of someone who refused to bow. The guards pushed him forward, shouting and striking. But the prisoner did not lower his head. He looked at the crowd, at the cages, at the masters. And when his gaze passed over Lyra's cage, she froze. For the first time in years, someone looked at her not as a pet, not as an animal, but as a person. The alien masters laughed, their voices sharp and cruel. "Look at this creature," one said. "So soft, so weak. It will not survive long," another sneered. But Lyra saw something different. This creature, the stranger, was not weak. He was dangerous. Not because of his size, not because of his chains, but because he carried something the masters had forgotten long ago. He carried defiance. The crowd whispered among themselves. "What is it? Where is it from? Why does it not kneel?" Lyra listened, catching fragments. A word she had never heard before reached her ears. Human. The human stood in the center of the pens, his chest rising and falling with steady breath. A guard hit him across the face, the sound echoing. But instead of crying out, the human smiled. It was not a smile of joy. It was a smile of challenge. And the masters did not like it. They shoved him into a cage not far from Lyra. The door slammed shut, metal scraping against stone. The crowd slowly dispersed. Still whispering, still glancing back, the market noise returned. But for Lyra, everything had changed. She could not stop looking at the human. Hours passed, silence filling the cages again. The slaves curled back into themselves, trying to forget the noise, the pain, the life they lived. But Lyra could not forget. She kept staring at the human. Why was he not afraid? Why did his eyes still burn? And why, when their gazes met, did she feel something she had not felt in years? Hope. The human noticed her watching. Slowly, carefully, he leaned closer to the bars. His voice was low, rough from thirst, but strong. "What's your name?" he asked. Lyra's lips parted, but no sound came. She had not spoken in so long. Her voice felt broken. Yet something inside pushed her to answer. "Lyra," she whispered, her voice trembling. The human nodded, as if the name was important, as if it meant something. "I'm Ethan," he said. A name from a world she did not know. A name that felt heavy with strength. Lyra glanced at the guards. Speaking between slaves was forbidden. If they were caught, the collars would burn. But Ethan did not care. He spoke again, softer this time. "Don't let them break you." Her eyes widened. No one had ever said that to her. No one had told her she was more than a pet. But this human, chained and beaten, said it like a command, like a promise. She shook her head, whispering back, "They already have." But Ethan's eyes narrowed. "No," he said firmly. "Not yet. Not while you still breathe." Lyra looked away. Her chest tight. The words were dangerous. Too dangerous. And yet, they echoed inside her like a forgotten song. Not while you still breathe. That night, she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's face. The bruises, the dirt, the chains, and still, the fire in his eyes. She remembered how he had looked at her. Not with pity, not with cruelty, but with respect. No one had ever looked at her that way. In the dark silence of the pens, a sound broke through. The guards dragging Ethan out of his cage, their voices angry. Lyra pressed her face against the bars, watching. "What did he do?" she whispered to herself. "They beat him, forced him to his knees." But Ethan still lifted his head. His voice rang out, sharp and clear. "You can chain me, but you will never own me." The guard struck him again, trying to silence him, but his words hung in the air, powerful and alive, and for the first time, Lyra felt her heart pound with something dangerous. Something she thought she had lost forever. A reason to believe, she whispered into the night. Though he could not hear her, "You are not like the others," and deep inside, a spark of hope began to burn, stronger than before. Days passed inside the slave pens. The cages stood silent, filled with broken bodies and broken minds. But two prisoners were different now. One was Lyra, the alien girl who once believed she was nothing more than a pet. The other was Ethan, the human who refused to bow. They were kept in separate cages, but close enough to see each other, close enough to share whispers when the guards turned away. At first, their words were short, cautious like sparks in the dark, but slowly they grew bolder, and a connection began to form. "Why don't you kneel?" Lyra asked one night, her voice barely a breath. Ethan's eyes lifted from his chains, his face bruised but steady. "Because I am not theirs," he said. "You wear chains," she whispered back. "The same as me." "Chains are not the same as obedience," Ethan replied, his tone sharp but calm. The words cut through Lyra like a blade. For years, she believed chains meant she had no choice. But this human, this stranger, carried chains like they were only weight. Not destiny, it was madness. Yet it stirred something inside her chest, something she had forgotten. Pride. Every day, the guards tested Ethan. They beat him when he stood too tall. They shocked his collar when he glared, instead of bowing. But no matter what they did, Ethan's fire did not die. And every time Lyra watched, she felt that fire burn inside her too. Small, faint, but growing. One evening, the market was quieter. The masters had gone to feast, leaving only a few guards half asleep. The air was heavy, still, filled with the scent of oil and smoke. Lyra leaned closer to the bars of her cage. "Human," she whispered. Ethan lifted his head, his lips twitching into the faintest smile. "Name's Ethan," he reminded her. "Ethan," she repeated. The sound strange but warm on her tongue. He nodded. "And you're Lyra. Don't forget who you are." She tilted her head. Confused, "I am nothing here," she said. "A pet, a thing." Ethan's eyes hardened. "No," he said. "You are someone. You have a name. And that means you matter." The silence stretched between them. Lyra's silver eyes shimmered faintly in the dim glow of the crystals. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not since she was free. Not since she was a child. Her heart trembled. Uncertain, afraid to believe. But Ethan's voice was steady, unshaken. It felt like a wall she could lean on, even inside this prison. Later that night, a sound echoed through the pens. A guard stormed in, dragging a whip across the floor. He stopped in front of Ethan's cage, his 4 eyes glaring. "You will kneel," the guard hissed. Ethan did not move. "You will kneel, or you will bleed." Ethan raised his head higher, his voice calm. "Do your worst." The whip cracked, striking across his back. Blood stained his torn shirt. Lyra flinched, her body pressing against the bars of her cage. But Ethan did not scream. He only clenched his fists, his teeth grinding. The guard struck again and again, but Ethan's fire did not fade. The guard cursed, finally storming off, leaving Ethan broken but unbent. When silence returned, Lyra whispered, her voice shaking, Why do you fight? They will kill you." Ethan's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his eyes turned toward her. "Because if I give in, I'm already dead," he said. The words struck deep. Lyra pressed her forehead against the bars, tears welling in her silver eyes. "I can't be like you," she whispered. "Yes, you can," Ethan answered. "You just don't believe it yet." For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the drip of water from the pipe, the rustling of chains, the distant murmurs of other slaves. But something had changed between them. Something unspoken, powerful. It was not only defiance, not only survival, it was trust. In the days that followed, Lyra found herself watching Ethan more closely. Every time he stood tall, she sat straighter. Every time he endured pain without surrender, she clenched her fists tighter. The guards began to notice, their eyes narrowing, their whispers sharp. "Careful," one muttered. The human is spreading poison, but it was not poison. It was something else, something dangerous to masters and precious to slaves. It was hope. One night, when the pens were silent, Ethan leaned close to the bars, his voice low, urgent. "They think we are broken, but they are wrong," he said. Lyra's breath caught. "They have the power," she whispered. "They have the chains." Ethan shook his head. "They only have what we give them." Then his eyes locked on hers, sharp and bright. "Remember this, Lyra. Humans don't bow to monsters. And neither should you." Her heart pounded, her hands trembling as she gripped the cold metal. His words were madness, reckless, dangerous. But in the stillness of the night, they became truth. And for the first time in her caged life, Lyra felt something fierce stir inside her. Not fear, not sorrow, but the first taste of rebellion. The days inside the slave pens did not change. Chains rattled, collars burned, masters laughed. But something invisible had begun to spread. It was quiet, unseen, carried in glances and whispers. It started with one human, Ethan, and then it moved to Lyra. And then, like smoke in dry air, it touched others too. Lyra noticed it first. The alien in the cage beside hers, who had not spoken in years, now lifted his head when Ethan walked past. Another slave, beaten and scarred, began to whisper prayers again. Not to the masters, but to freedom. It was small, faint, but it was growing. And the guards felt it, though they did not understand it. One evening, the masters gathered in the market square. Their voices carried, sharp and mocking. They spoke of sales, of profit, of slaves as if they were nothing more than tools. The guards dragged Ethan forward, chains clanging against the stones. They wanted to break him, to show the others that hope was useless. But when they threw him to his knees, Ethan did not bow his head. The masters sneered. "You will kneel before us," one said. Ethan raised his eyes, blood on his face, his voice low but steady. "I kneel to no one." A ripple passed through the slaves. Lyra felt her heart hammer, her breath catch. The guard struck him. The collar burned his skin, but Ethan's voice did not falter. "You can hurt me," he said, "but you cannot own me." The square grew tense. The masters laughed to cover their unease, but the slaves heard the words, every single one. And in that moment, Lyra realized something terrifying. The human was not afraid of dying, and that made him dangerous. That night, in the silence of the pens, Ethan whispered to Lyra through the bars. "They are afraid of us," Lyra frowned, her silver eyes narrowing. "No," she whispered back. "They have power, weapons, control." Ethan shook his head. "They are afraid because they know what happens when one spark becomes a fire." Lyra's chest tightened. A fire, the word stayed with her. Burning in her mind, she wanted to believe it. But chains clinked every time she moved, a painful reminder of her cage. And yet, when she looked at Ethan, she saw a fire that chains could not hold. The next day, the guards decided to test the human again. They ordered him to crawl. The slaves watched, silent, afraid. Ethan stood still, his chains heavy but his spine straight. The guard raised his whip, ready to strike, but before it could fall, a sound cut through the silence. It was not Ethan, it was Lyra. "Stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. The guard turned, eyes narrowing. The slaves gasped, shocked that she had dared to speak. Her body trembled, her collar buzzed with warning. But Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and calm, and in that moment, she felt strength she did not know she had. "Stop," she said again, louder. The guard struck her cage in anger, sparks flying from the metal. But the silence that followed was heavy, alive, for the first time. A slave had stood beside the human's defiance, and the spark leapt from one cage to another. Later, when the guards were gone, Ethan whispered to her, "You felt it, didn't you?" Her hand still shook, her collar still burned faintly against her skin. But her eyes glowed in the dark, silver and bright. "Yes," she whispered back, "I felt it, in the shadows." Other slaves began to whisper too, a small voice from the farthest cage. "We are not animals," another, trembling. "We are not pets." The whispers grew, carried like wind through the pens. and though the guards tried to silence them with fear, they could not stop the words, not once they had begun. Ethan leaned back against the wall of his cage, blood still on his lips but a smile forming. "It has started," he murmured. Lyra stared at him, her heart beating fast. "What has started?" she asked. "The rebellion," he said simply, his voice filled with quiet fire. The word hung in the air, rebellion. It was dangerous, forbidden, impossible, and yet, for the first time in her life, Lyra believed it was real. That night, she did not dream of chains, she dreamed of breaking them. She dreamed of running not alone, but side by side with Ethan. She dreamed of fire spreading through the pens, devouring the silence, and when she woke, her eyes glowed brighter than ever. The masters still thought they owned her. The guards still thought they controlled Ethan. But something had shifted, something invisible and unstoppable. A spark had been lit, and soon, the fire would come. The night was heavy with silence. The guards sat around the fire, drinking and laughing. Their weapons leaning against the wall, the masters were gone, feasting in the high halls above the market, and the slaves lay in their cages, pretending to sleep, but in the dark, something else was awake. Ethan's eyes glowed faintly from the shadows of his cage. His hands worked at the chains, rubbing them against a jagged stone he had hidden. Each scrape was quiet, patient, deadly. Lyra watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. "You'll be killed," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Maybe," Ethan said, his teeth clenched as he pulled against the chain. "But better to die free than live as their pet." The sound of metal snapping was small, but to Lyra it was louder than thunder. Ethan's wrists were free, raw skin torn from the struggle. He gripped the bars of his cage and pulled, muscles straining, the metal bent, just enough for him to squeeze through. Lyra gasped, her silver eyes wide. He was free. The guards were still laughing by the fire, unaware. Ethan moved like a shadow. Silent and fast, he crept behind one guard, wrapped the broken chain around his neck, and pulled. The guard thrashed, but Ethan held firm until the body went limp. He lowered it gently, grabbing the weapon from its belt. The firelight flickered against the blade. Sharp and deadly, the other guard turned, confused. "Where is?" His words cut short as Ethan lunged, the blade striking true. The guard fell, blood staining the stone floor. The fire crackled. The night seemed to hold its breath. And then silence. Lyra pressed against the bars, her voice trembling. "You killed them." Ethan's face was hard, his eyes burning. "They would have killed us," he said. "Now we have a chance." He rushed to her cage, slamming the blade against the lock, sparks flying. The lock cracked, broke, and the door swung open. For the first time in years, Lyra stepped out of her cage. Her legs shook, her hands trembled. The ground felt strange beneath her bare feet. She looked at Ethan, her voice breaking. I'm free," he nodded, gripping her hand firmly. "Not yet, but we will be." The other slaves stared from their cages, their eyes wide, their voices whispering. "Free," they murmured. "They are free." Ethan turned to them, his voice low but powerful. "Tonight we choose. Stay in cages or fight for freedom." The whispers grew louder. Desperate, hands reached through the bars, begging, pleading. "Free us, free us." Lyra looked at Ethan, her silver eyes glowing brighter than ever. "We can't leave them," she said. Ethan nodded, determination hardening his face. "Then we free them all." Together, they smashed the locks, one by one. The sound of breaking metal filled the pens. The slaves stepped out, weak, trembling, but alive. Some cried, some laughed, some simply touched the ground as if they had forgotten what freedom felt like. Lyra guided them, whispering, "Stay quiet, stay close." But silence could not last. A horn sounded in the distance, sharp and angry. The guards had found the bodies. Shouts filled the night, weapons clashing, footsteps pounding on stone. The slaves froze, terror flooding their faces. But Ethan raised the stolen blade, his voice fierce. "Run!" Chaos erupted. The slaves surged forward, breaking through the pens, chains clattering to the ground. Guards rushed in from every side, but Ethan was faster. Striking with brutal precision, Lyra grabbed the fallen staff, her hands shaking, and swung with all her strength, knocking the guard to the ground. The sound of the impact shocked her, but she did not stop. For the first time she fought. The pens were alive with noise, screams, chains, the clash of metal. The masters above shouted orders, their voices trembling with fear. Slaves poured into the streets, their silver eyes, green eyes, blue eyes shining in the darkness. The city was no longer silent. The city was on fire with rebellion. Ethan pulled Lyra through the chaos, cutting a path. "Stay with me," he shouted. She gripped his hand tighter, her chest burning, her legs trembling. "I'm not letting go," she said, her voice fierce. They ran through the alleys, past broken walls and burning torches. Behind them, the sound of horns grew louder. The city was waking to the rebellion, and the hunt had begun. But ahead, beyond the walls, Lyra saw something she had not seen in years. The open sky, vast and endless, stars burning bright. Her breath caught, her heart surged. Freedom was not just a dream anymore. It was here, it was real, and she would not let it slip away. But then, footsteps thundered from the shadows. A squad of armored guards blocked the path, weapons raised, eyes gleaming with fury. Lyra froze, her chest heaving. Ethan stepped forward, his blade dripping, his voice steady. "Then we fight," he said. And the night held its breath once more. The street was narrow, the stone walls glowing with faint crystal light. Ethan stood in front, his blade raised, his body tense. Lyra stood beside him, her heart racing, her hands shaking around the stolen staff. Behind them, dozens of freed slaves pressed close, their eyes wide with fear. And ahead, the armored guards waited, weapons gleaming, blocking the only path to freedom. For a moment, the night was silent. No one moved, no one breathed. The stars shone above, bright and cold, as if watching. Then the leader of the guards stepped forward, his voice sharp like broken glass. "You are nothing," he spat. "Slaves, pets, animals. You belong in cages." The words burned inside Lyra. She remembered every time she was called a pet, every time the collar burned her skin, every night she cried in silence. But now Ethan's hand brushed hers. "Steady, strong. Don't listen," he whispered, his eyes never leaving the enemy. "They fear us," the guards charged, the clash of metal filling the night. Ethan struck first, his blade flashing. Steel meeting steel, Lyra's body froze for a heartbeat, terror gripping her chest. But then a guard lunged at her, his weapon swinging. Instinct took over. She lifted her staff and blocked, the shock vibrating through her arms. Her silver eyes blazed, and with a scream she swung back, striking the guard across the head. The alien fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. The slaves gasped, watching her. For the first time, Lyra was not a victim, not a pet. She was a fighter. The battle raged. Ethan moved like fire, cutting down enemies with speed and fury. The guards outnumbered him, but he fought with something they could not match. Will. Lyra fought beside him, her fear burning away with every strike. Her staff cracked against armor, her body moving faster, stronger, freer. The slaves behind them began to shout, their voices rising, "Fight, fight!" One by one, the freed prisoners grabbed fallen weapons. They joined the battle, clumsy but desperate. The narrow street exploded with chaos, metal, blood, screams, and for the first time, the slaves were not running. They were fighting. The leader of the guards roared, his four eyes blazing. He struck at Ethan with a massive blade, the force nearly knocking him down. Ethan gritted his teeth, blocking, but his arms trembled with the weight. The guard pushed harder. Ethan's knees buckled, the blade inching closer. "Ethan," Lyra cried, her voice breaking. Something snapped inside her. Not fear, not weakness, something older, deeper. A memory of her people, once proud, once free. She felt it in her blood, in her bones' power. Her silver eyes glowed brighter, shining like stars. The collar around her neck sparked, then shattered with a burst of light, pieces falling to the ground. The guards froze, their faces twisting with shock. Lyra lifted her staff, her voice rising, clear and fierce. "We are not pets," she shouted. "We are not yours." Energy surged through her body, flowing into her weapon when she swung. The staff cracked with power, slamming into the leader of the guards. The force sent him crashing into the wall, stone shattering, his armor breaking. The slaves roared, their voices shaking the night. For the first time, they believed. Ethan rose, blood on his face, but his eyes blazing with pride. He looked at Lyra, breathless. "You chose," he said. Her chest heaved, her silver eyes still glowing. "Yes," she whispered, gripping the staff tighter. "I chose freedom," the guards faltered. Their formation breaking, the slaves pressed forward, fury replacing fear. Together, side by side, human and alien fought as one. The guards fell, their weapons clattering to the ground. The path ahead was open. Silence returned, broken only by heavy breaths. The street was littered with bodies, the night filled with the scent of smoke and blood. The freed slaves stood trembling, but their eyes burned with new light. They were no longer silent, no longer broken. Lyra raised her staff high, her voice strong. "No more chains," she shouted, and the others echoed, their voices like thunder. "No more chains." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding her. "You changed everything tonight," he said, his voice low. Lyra turned to him, her heart still racing. "No," she replied, her voice steady now. "We changed it together." The stars stretched above them, endless and waiting, but they knew the battle was not finished. The masters would not stay silent. The hunt would not end. This was only the beginning. Still, for the first time, Lyra felt her heart alive, her body strong, her spirit free. The choice had been made. She would never be a pet again, and beside her, the human stood, fierce and unbroken. Together, they would face whatever came next. The street was quiet now. The bodies of guards lay still, weapons scattered across the stones. Smoke rose into the night, carrying the smell of battle. The freed slaves stood together, trembling, wounded, but alive. They had fought, and they had won. Lyra stood in the center, her silver eyes glowing faintly. The broken collar lay at her feet, a reminder of the life she had left behind. For so long she had been silent, chained, treated as a pet. Now she stood tall, her staff in hand, her heart burning with fire. Ethan walked beside her, his blade dripping, his breath heavy but steady. His clothes were torn, his body bruised, yet his eyes still shone with that same fire. He looked at her, and for the first time, she did not look away. "You are free now," he said, his voice low. "No," Lyra replied, her voice strong. "We are free," the slaves murmured, their voices growing louder. "Free, free." They touched their broken collars, dropped their chains onto the ground. The sound of metal falling echoed through the street. Sharp and final, it was the sound of an ending, and the sound of a beginning. But freedom was fragile. Above them, in the towers of the masters, horns blared. Lights flared across the city, alarms spreading. The rebellion had been noticed, and punishment was coming. Lyra's chest tightened, but Ethan's hand steadied her. "This is not the end," he said. "It's the start of something bigger." The slaves looked to them, eyes filled with fear, but also with trust. For the first time they had leaders, not masters, but fighters. Lyra felt the weight of their gazes, and for a moment, doubt filled her. She was just a girl, once a pet. But Ethan's voice cut through her fear. Calm and steady. "They need you," he said. "And you are ready." Her silver eyes burned brighter. She raised her staff high, her voice strong. "We are not pets," she shouted. The crowd echoed, their voices like thunder. "We are not pets," she shouted again, louder. "We are not slaves." And the answer roared back, shaking the night. "We are not slaves." The fire of rebellion spread through the freed. Their fear turned into strength, their silence into fury. They were no longer victims. They were survivors, fighters, and soon they would be an army. Ethan looked at the broken gates of the city. Beyond them stretched the wild lands, and above, the endless stars. But behind them, more guards, more masters, more chains. "We can't stay here," he said. "We need to move, find a ship. Escape before they crush us." Lyra nodded, her heart racing. She looked once more at the cages, now empty. For years those bars had held her. Now they stood open, broken, useless. She felt no fear, only resolve. "We leave tonight," she said. "And we never return." The slaves moved quickly, gathering weapons, helping the wounded. Some looked back with tears, some with anger, but none looked back with longing. The city of cages was no longer their home. It was their grave, and they had chosen to rise from it. Ethan and Lyra led them through the streets. The alarms grew louder, the horns sharper, but their footsteps did not falter. Every corner they turned, more voices joined. Slaves hidden in the shadows, prisoners locked inside alleys when they saw Lyra, glowing with fire, and Ethan, standing unbroken, they followed. The rebellion was no longer a spark. It was becoming a storm. Finally, they reached the edge of the city. Before them stretched the starport, guarded and bristling with ships. Lyra's breath caught, her heart pounding. The stars were so close now, so close she could almost touch them. Freedom was waiting. Not just escape, but a future. Ethan stood tall, his blade steady, his voice firm. "We take a ship," he said, "and then we take our destiny." The slaves roared, their voices shaking the air. Lyra raised her staff, her eyes blazing. Together, they stepped forward. The battle was not over. The masters would come with armies. The galaxy would not forgive rebellion so easily. But Lyra no longer feared. She had chosen. Ethan had chosen, and together they would fight. As they marched toward the starport, the night sky stretched above, endless and full of stars. The future was uncertain, dangerous and full of war. But for the first time, it was theirs. Lyra looked at Ethan, her voice soft but fierce. "This is only the beginning," she said, and Ethan smiled, fire in his eyes. "Humans fight for more than survival," he said. "We fight for those we call our own." The slaves followed, their voices rising like a storm. The city trembled, the stars waited, and the galaxy would soon learn a truth it had forgotten. Humans do not bow, and neither do those who stand with them.